Welcome back to Sister for Sister Story Time. So, it's been a while, but today I want to go over. So, we know that I'm exposing the Illuminati, Mason's Eastern Stars. So, to get a full understanding of how the Eastern Stars and their sacrifices goes back into the Bible and how they use the Bible against us or any religion for that matter. So, first, we're going to go over what Memphis in May is. Now, if we understand what Egypt is, Egypt was a place of bondage in scripture. So, the Bible says that you will go back into Egypt. First, we're going to read about Memphis in May. And then we're going to talk about Baal, Beale Street, Kill Bill, and all of that good stuff. Mhm. Okay, so according to Wikipedia, Memphis in May is an international festival, a month long festival held in Memphis, Tennessee. The festival, which is saluting Ghana in 2022, honors a specific foreign country every year and features many events. The Beale Street Music Festival takes place the first weekend in May and showcases an eclectic lineup of national and local musical talent. International Week is a series of exhibits, screenings, arts, and performances dedicated to each year's honored country. The World Championship Barbecue Cooking Contest has become one of the most popular barbecue contests in the country and has been observed for 46 years. The Great American River Run half marathon and 5K welcomes runners of all experience levels through the streets of Memphis and along the banks of the Mississippi River, while 901 Fest includes a salute to all things Memphis. Let's see, this device is very slow. So the Beale Street Music Festival is a 3-day music festival that has both a mix of big name stars and local musical acts. Held during the first weekend of May in the city's Tom Lee Park at the foot of Beale Street, it is considered to be the kickoff event of the entire Memphis in May International Festival celebration. It typically hosts over 100,000 people during the weekend. The Beale Street Music Festival is the only program that has been held every year since the inception of Memphis in May in 1977. Its history can be traced back to the 1800s when African American musicians throughout the South would come to Beale Street and perform. The Beale Street Musical Festival is known for featuring an eclectic mix of genres on its lineup every year, from blues and rock and roll to rap and pop. The list of bands and musicians that have performed at the festival continue to grow each year, but the list includes Stevie Ray Vaughan, Ray Charles, B.B. King in 91. In 2015, lived in Memphis. John Lee Hooker in 91, Booker T and the MGs in 99, Jerry Lee Lewis from Memphis in '03, Box Tops from Memphis in 97, Big Star in 99, Fuel from the Jackson, Tennessee area in '04, Saliva, disgusting, from Memphis in '04, Willie Nelson, Leonard Skinnard, Al Green in '09, now a preacher in Memphis, Isaac Hayes from Memphis in 2000 and 2008, John Prine or Preen, James Brown, Bob Dylan or Dylan, Black Crowes, Van Morrison, Dave Matthews Band, Widespread Panic, Foo Fighters, The Killers, Snoop Dogg, Kid Rock, John Mayer, Journey, Nelly, Steely Dan, Allman Brothers, Santana, James Taylor, Bobby Blue Band, Blue Bland, Korn, the Abbott Brothers, Mumford and Sons, Kings of Leon from Nashville in 17, Paramore from Nashville in 15, 10 Years from Knoxville in '06, Soundgarden, Wiz Khalifa, Jane's Addiction, Chuck Berry, The Black Keys, Avenged Sevenfold, Alabama Shakes, Lenny Kravitz, Ed Sheeran, Neil Young, Beck, Paul Simon, Ziggy Marley, Sturgill Simpson, Aretha Franklin in '09, 2018, also born in Memphis, Earth, Wind, and Fire in 2010. Maurice White was born in Memphis. Yo Gotti in 2016. 3-6 Mafia from Memphis in '06. Weezer, and many more. Many of the festival's best known performers were immortalized in portraits by iconic Memphis painter George Hunt, who produced the Beale Street Music Festival's commemorative poster art for 28 years before his passing in December 2020. Who knows anything about art and magic? Comment and let me know. So, International Week. Every year, the festival recognizes a different country, most recently saluting Ghana in 2022. A week of events that typically begin the day after the Beale Street Music Fest, International Week is dedicated to a country and showcases the foods and culture of that nation. While International Week provides a learning experience for the community at large, the core is a comprehensive educational program for area youth in public and private schools throughout Memphis and Shelby County. The goal of International Week is for area students, by the time they graduate from high school, to have had the opportunity to experience the customs and cultures of 12 countries. Now, I want to know how people who read the Bible feel about that. What does the Bible say about learning the customs of other peoples, or even being around certain cultures or peoples? So, 3 of the festival's honored countries, Japan, Canada, and the Netherlands, have been featured twice. Perhaps most important are the trade delegates that visit Memphis and have introductions to suitable high-level trade partners. And if you know about trading and the stolen lands, you'll understand where I'm going with this. So, through the years, the Memphis in May International Festival has played host to ambassadors, exhibits, and performance troops from 38 countries. The milestone 20th annual event in 1996 honored all previous selected countries. The 2019 event honored the bicentennials of the founding of the city of Memphis and of the establishment of Shelby County. Festivities were canceled in 2020 and 2021 due to the ongoing effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Malaysia has been selected as the focus for 2023. What's the focus for 2024? So what's going on 2024? As of the 15th, they had lighting of the grill, cattleman stage, barbecue alley, sauce wrestling. What else? Tuffy Stone and Dustin Green, Weber and Fogo. Demo with Brady Doc. Bubba Grills. Loco Cookers. Steak Princess. Executive Chef. Swine and Dine. Just pay attention. Swine and Dine, Bubba Grills, Blues Hog, Russell's Dam Good Barbecue, The Hog Father, Tuffy Stone. Okay, so pretty much you get the drift. So it's a swine fest, barbecue, grills, the braising, the brazier, or whatever it's called. Brazier, the braising grill. So, the history. The WCBCC started in 1978 with 26 teams. The contest drew 50 teams in 1979, 80 in 1980, and 180 teams from 9 states in 1981. It has now grown to the largest pork barbecue competition in the world, and I literally just said that. More than 250 teams from 20 plus states and several countries compete, and an estimated 100,000 people attend the competition. Media from around the world, including BBC and the Food Network, come to the city to cover the event. Credit for the original idea of a barbecue contest goes to Rodney Babber, chairman of the Memphis in May Events Committee in 1977, and his co-worker, Jack Powell, Tennessee's reigning chili champ at the time. The original champion at the first competition was Bessie Louise Cathy, who won a $500 prize, sizable return for her $12 entry fee. Today, the prizes for each event range from $300,000 to $15,000 for the main cooking competition, and from $250,000 to $2,500 for the ancillary contest. Today's entry fees range from $700 to $2,600 just for renting the necessary booth space and an extra $60 per competition entry. Some teams regularly budget amounts in excess of $15,000 just for the competition and booth. In 1989, when officials discovered that there was a feast in Honolulu, which earned the title of largest barbecue in the Guinness Book of Records, they calculated the amount of food prepared at the WCBCC. The total was 55,297 pounds of pork, and thus earned the WCBCC a record in the 1990 edition. Over 16 tons of pork were smoked at the 2016 WCBCC. The 2017 World Championship Barbecue Cooking Contest was the first time the event spanned 4 days instead of 3. In addition, the Big Bob Gibson barbecue team became the first 5-time champion of the event: 2017, 2014, 2011, 2003, and 2000. No contests were held in 2020 through 2021. Food events. The competition has 3 official meat categories: rib, shoulder, and whole hog. Now, remember, apply these to the biblical feast. Apply this to the Levitical priesthood sacrifices. Okay, so there is also the Patio Porkers Division, which encourages up to 40 amateur teams who have not previously won the Patio Porker Division in the WCBCC to enter. Only wood and charcoal cooking is allowed at the event. No gas or any other sort of heat system is allowed to be used. Why is that? Again, apply to scripture. Beyond those main categories, teams also compete in several other ancillary contests over the 4-day event, including Best Sauce, Tomato Mustard Vinegar, Frank's Red Hot Wings, Kingsford Tour of Champions, and anything but exotic beef, seafood, poultry. Special events. Miss Piggy. Teams dress up contestants as pigs and then perform songs or skits on stage. Best Booth. Booths are judged on design, originality, and connection with the honored country. T-shirt design. Shirts are judged on design, originality, and connection with the honored country. Sauce wrestling. Things get a little messy with this one as teams send a representative to the wrestling ring filled with over 40 gallons of barbecue sauce. Big Hog Run, coined as America's most prestigious 0.2K race. The Big Hog Run is a thrilling 656-foot sprint down Beale Street. Only WCBCC team members and judges are allowed to compete. Cooker Caravan. The Cooker Caravan provides the public a behind-the-scenes look at competition barbecue by offering guided tours to teams in each championship category. Great American River Run, half marathon, and 5K. The Great American River Run made its Memphis in May debut in 2016. The race attracts runners of all experience level, featuring half marathon and 5K distances. The race course takes runners through downtown Memphis and along the banks of the Mississippi River. The inaugural race drew over 2,000 runners from more than 30 states. Every registrant is given a race t-shirt and every finisher is awarded a medal. The races went virtual in 2020 through 2021. The 901 Fest made its inaugural appearance at the 2016 Memphis in May International Festival. The programming for the event is centered around local musicians, artists, vendors, and includes an air show and fireworks display. Now, what is barbecue? So, barbecue, often shortened to BBQ in the UK, US, and Canada. Barbie, Nicki Minaj, or Barbie, Barby, in Australia and New Zealand, and Bray, Brai, in South Africa, is a term used with significant regional and national variations to describe various cooking methods that employ live fire and smoke to cook the food. The term is also generally applied to the devices associated with those methods, the broader cuisines that these methods produce, and the meals or gatherings at which this style of food is cooked and served. The cooking methods associated with barbecuing vary significantly, but most involve outdoor cooking. The various regional variations of barbecue can be broadly categorized into those methods which use direct and those which use indirect heating. Indirect barbecues are associated with North American cuisine, in which meat is heated by roasting or smoking over wood or charcoal. North American cuisine. These methods of barbecue involve cooking using smoke at low temperatures and long cooking times for several hours. Elsewhere, barbecuing more commonly refers to the more direct application of heat, grilling of food over hot coals or a gas fire. Excuse me. This technique is usually done over direct, dry heat or a hot fire for a few minutes. Within these broader categorizations are further national and regional differences. Etymology and spelling. The English word barbecue and its cognates in other languages come from the Spanish word barbacoa, which has its origin in an indigenous American word. Etymologists believe this to be derived from barabicu, found in the language of the Arawak people of the Caribbean and the Timucua people of Florida. It has entered some European languages in the form of barbacoa. The Oxford English Dictionary, OED, traces the word to Hispaniola and translated as a framework of sticks set up on posts. Somebody said something about the Arawaks yesterday. I'll think of it later. Anywho, a popular folk etymology of the word says that the term is derived from the French barbe, a queue, from beard to tail, signifying a whole animal being roasted on a spit. But this origin for the word is not supported by academic etymology. The term itself has two spellings in English: barbecue, Barbecue, and barbecue, Barbeque. While in most countries the spelling barbecue with the C is used, the spelling barbecue with the Q is occasionally used in Australia, New Zealand, and the US. More history. So, Spanish explorer Gonzalo Fernandez de Oviedo y Valdez was the first to use the word barbacoa in print in Spain in 1526 in the Diccionario de la Lengua Española, second edition of the Real Academia Española. After Columbus landed in the Americas in 1942, the Spaniards apparently found Taino roasting meat over a grill consisting of a wooden framework resting on sticks above a fire. This framework was also used to store food above ground and for sleeping. The flames and smoke rose and enveloped the meat, giving it a certain flavor. Spaniards called the framework a barbacoa. Another form of barbacoa involves digging a hole in the ground, burning logs in it, and placing stones in it to absorb and retain heat. Large cuts of meat, often wrapped in leaves, often a whole goat or lamb, above a pot so the juices can be used to make a broth. It is then covered with maguey leaves and coal and set alight. The cooking process takes a few hours. Aludo Equiano, an African abolitionist, described this method of roasting alligators among the Mosquito people on his journeys to Cabo Gracias a Dios on the Mosquito Coast in his narrative, The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Aludo Equiano. Linguists have suggested the word was loaned successively into Spanish, then Portuguese, French, and English. In the form barbacado or barbacado, the word was used in English in 1648 by the supposed Beauchamp or Beauchamp Plantagenet in the tract, a description of the province of New Albion. The Indians, instead of salt, do barbacado or dry and smoked fish. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, the first recorded use in modern form was in 1661 in Edmund Hickeringill's Jamaica Viewed, Some Are Slain, and Their Flesh Forthwith Barbecued and Eat. It also appears in 1672 in the writings of John Lederer following his travels in the North American Southeast in 1669 through 1670. The first known use as a noun was in 1697 by the English buccaneer William Dampier. In his New Voyage Round the World, Dampier wrote, "And lay there all night upon our barbecues or frames of sticks, raised about 3 foot or 0.91 meters from the ground." As early as the 1730s, New England Puritans were familiar with barbecue, as on 4 November 1731, New London, Connecticut resident Joshua Hempstead wrote in his diary, "I was at Madam Winthrop's at an entertainment or treat of Colin or Colonel or Samuel Brown's a barbecued." Samuel Johnson's 1755 dictionary gave the following definitions. To barbecue, a term for dressing a whole hog. Attestation to Pope. Barbecue, a hog dressed whole. While the standard modern English spelling of the word is barbecue with the C, variations including barbecue with the Q and truncations such as barbecue with dashes between the B-A-R-B and the Q or just BBQ may also be found. The spelling barbecue with the Q is given in the Merriam-Webster as a variant, whereas the Oxford dictionaries explain that it is a misspelling which is not accepted in standard English and is best avoided. In the southeastern United States, the word barbecue with the C is used predominantly as a noun referring to roast pork, while in the southwestern states, cuts of beef are often cooked. Associations. Because the word barbecue came from native groups, Europeans gave it savage connotations. This association with barbarians and savages is strengthened by Edmund Hickeringill's work Jamaica Viewed, with all the ports, harbors, and their several soundings, towns, and settlements through its descriptions of cannibalism. However, according to Andrew Warnes, there is very little proof that Hickeringill's tale of cannibalism in the Caribbean is even remotely true. Another notable false depiction of cannibalistic barbecues appears in Theodore de Brye's Great Voyages, which in Warnes' eyes present smoke cookery as a custom quintessential to an underlying savagery that everywhere contains within it a potential for cannibalistic violence. Today, people in the U.S. associate barbecue with classic Americana. So we're just going to go ahead and go into what cannibalism is, and then we'll work our way back to the May Beltane festivals. So, human cannibalism is the act or practice of humans eating the flesh or internal organs of other human beings. A person who practices cannibalism is called a cannibal. The meaning of cannibalism has been extended into zoology to describe animals consuming parts of individuals of the same species as food. Both anatomically modern humans and Neanderthals practiced cannibalism to some extent in the Pleistocene, and Neanderthals may have been eaten by modern humans as the latter spread into Europe. Cannibalism was occasionally practiced in Egypt during ancient and Roman times, as well as later during severe famines. The island Caribs of the Lesser Antilles, whose name is the origin of the word cannibal, acquired a long-standing reputation as eaters of human flesh, reconfirmed when their legends were recorded in the 17th century. Some controversy exists over the accuracy of these legends and the prevalence of actual cannibalism in the culture. Cannibalism has been well documented in much of the world, including Fiji, once nicknamed the Cannibal Isles, the Amazon Basin, the Congo, and the Maori people of New Zealand. Cannibalism was also practiced in New Guinea, wonder why it's called a guinea pig, and in parts of the Solomon Islands. And human flesh was sold at markets in some parts of Melanesia and of the Congo Basin. A form of cannibalism popular in early modern Europe was the consumption of body parts or blood for medical purposes. Reaching its height during the 17th century, this practice continued in some cases into the second half of the 19th century. Cannibalism has occasionally been practiced as a last resort by people suffering from famine Well-known examples include the ill-fated Donner Party, 1846 to 1847, the Holodomor, 1932 through 1933, and the crash of Uraguayan Air Force Flight 571 in 1972, after which the survivors ate the bodies of the dead. Additionally, there are cases of people engaging in cannibalism for sexual pleasure, such as Albert Fish, Issy Sagwa, Jeffrey Dahmer, and Armin Miles, or Miles, whatever. Cannibalism has been both practiced and fiercely condemned in recent several wars, especially in Liberia and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It was still practiced in Papua New Guinea as of 2012 for cultural reasons. Cannibalism has been said to test the bounds of cultural relativism because it challenges anthropologists to define what is or is not beyond the pale of acceptable human behavior. A few scholars argue that no firm evidence exists that cannibalism has ever been a socially acceptable practice anywhere in the world, but such views have been largely rejected as irreconcilable with the actual evidence. The etymology. The word cannibal is derived from Spanish cannibal, C-A-N-I-B-A-L, or caribal, C-A-R-I-B-A-L. Originally used as a name variant for the Kalinago or island Caribs, a people from the West Indies said to have eaten human flesh. The older term anthropophagy, meaning eating humans, is also used for human cannibalism. Reasons and types. Cannibalism has been practiced under a variety of circumstances and for various motives. To adequately express this diversity, Shirley Lindenbaum suggests that it might be better to talk about cannibalisms in the plural. Institutionalized, survival, and pathological cannibalism. One major distinction is whether cannibal acts are accepted by the culture in which they occur, institutionalized cannibalism, or whether they are merely practiced under starvation conditions to ensure one's immediate survival, which is survival cannibalism, or by isolated individuals considered criminal and often pathological by society at large, cannibalism as psychopathology or aberrant behavior. Institutionalized cannibalism, sometimes also called learned cannibalism, is the consumption of human body parts as an institutionalized practice generally accepted in the culture where it occurs. By contrast, survival cannibalism means the consumption of others under conditions of starvation, such as shipwreck, military siege, and famine, in which persons normally are driven to it by the will to live. Also known as famine cannibalism, such forms of cannibalism resorted to only in situations of extreme necessity have occurred in many cultures where cannibalism is otherwise clearly rejected. The survivors of the shipwrecks of the Essex and Medusa or Medusa in the 19th century are said to have engaged in cannibalism, as did the members of Franklin's Lost Expedition and the Donner Party. Such cases often involved only necro-cannibalism, eating the corpse of someone already dead, as opposed to homicidal cannibalism, killing someone for food. In modern English law, the latter is always considered a crime, even in the most trying circumstances. The case of R versus Dudley and Stephens, in which two men were found guilty of murder for killing and eating a cabin boy while adrift at sea in a lifeboat, set the precedent that necessity is no defense to a change. Necessity is no defense to a charge of murder. This decision outlawed and effectively ended the practice of shipwrecked sailors drawing lots in order to determine who would be killed and eaten to prevent the others from starving, a time-honored practice formerly known as a custom of the sea. In other cases, cannibalism is an expression of a psychopathology or mental disorder condemned by the society in which it occurs and considered to be an indicator of a severe personality disorder or psychosis. Well-known cases include Albert Fish, Issey Sagawa, and Armin Meiwes. Fantasies of cannibalism, whether acted out or not, are not specifically mentioned in manuals of mental disorders such as the DSM, presumably because at least serious cases that lead to murder are very rare. Exo, endo, and auto cannibalism. Within institutionalized cannibalism, exo-cannibalism is often distinguished from endo-cannibalism. Endo-cannibalism refers to the consumption of a person from the same community. Often it is a part of a funerary ceremony similar to the burial or cremation in other cultures. The consumption of the recently deceased in such rites can be considered an act of affection and a major part of the grieving process. It has also been explained as a way of guiding the souls of the dead into the bodies of living descendants. In contrast, exo-cannibalism is the consumption of a person from outside the community. It is frequently an act of aggression, often in the context of warfare, where the flesh of killed or captured enemies may be eaten to celebrate one's victory over them. Some scholars explain both types of cannibalism as due to a belief that eating a person's flesh or internal organs will endow the cannibal with some of the positive characteristics of the deceased. However, several authors investigating exo-cannibalism in New Zealand, New Guinea, and the Congo Basin observed that such beliefs were absent in these regions. A further type, different from both exo and endo cannibalism, is autocannibalism, also called autophagy or self-cannibalism, the act of eating parts of oneself. It does not ever seem to have been an institutionalized practice, but occasionally occurs as pathological behavior or due to other reasons such as curiosity. Also on record are instances of forced autocannibalism committed as acts of aggression, where individuals are forced to eat parts of their own bodies as a form of torture. Additional motives and explanations. Exo-cannibalism is thus often associated with the consumption of enemies as an act of aggression, a practice also known as war cannibalism. Endo-cannibalism is often associated with the consumption of deceased relatives in funerary rites driven by affection, a practice known as funerary or mortuary cannibalism. But acts of institutionalized cannibalism can also be driven by various other motives for which additional names have been coined. Medicinal cannibalism, also called medical cannibalism, means the ingestion of human tissue as a supposed medicine or tonic. In contrast to other forms of cannibalism, which Europeans generally frowned upon, the medical ingestion of various human body parts was widely practiced throughout Europe from the 16th through to the 18th centuries. With early records of the practice going back to the first century CE, it was also frequently practiced in China. Sacrificial cannibalism refers to the consumption of the flesh of victims of human sacrifice, for example, among the Aztecs. Human and animal remains excavated in Knossos, Crete, have been interpreted as evidence of a ritual in which children and sheep were sacrificed and eaten together during the Bronze Age. According to ancient Roman reports, the Celts in Britain practiced sacrificial cannibalism, and archaeological evidence backing these claims has now been found. Infanticidal cannibalism, or cannibalistic infanticide, refers to cases where newborns or infants are killed because they are considered unwanted or unfit to live, and then consumed by the mother, father, both parents, or close relatives. Infanticide, followed by cannibalism, was practiced in various regions, but is particularly well documented among Aboriginal Australians. Among animals, such behavior is called filial cannibalism, and it is common in many species, especially among fish. Human predation is the hunting of people from unrelated and possibly hostile groups in order to eat them. In parts of the southern New Guinea lowland rainforest, hunting people was an opportunistic extension of seasonal foraging or pillaging strategies, with human bodies just as welcome as those of animals as sources of protein, according to the anthropologist Bruce M. Knott. As populations living near coasts and rivers were usually better nourished and hence often physically larger and stronger than those living inland, they raided inland bush peoples with impunity and often with little fear of retaliation. Cases of human predation are also on record for the neighboring Bismarck Archipelago and for Australia. In the Congo Basin, there lived groups such as the Zapo-Zaps, who hunted humans for food even when game was plentiful. The term gastronomic cannibalism has been suggested for cases where human flesh is eaten to provide a supplement to the regular diet. This essentially for its nutritional value, or in an alternative definition, for cases where it is eaten without ceremony other than culinary, in the same manner as the flesh of any other animal. While the term has been criticized as being too vague to clearly identify a specific type of cannibalism, various records indicate that nutritional or culinary concerns could indeed play a role in such acts even outside of periods of starvation. Referring to the Congo Basin, where many of the eaten were butchered slaves rather than enemies killed in war, the anthropologist Emile Torde notes that the most common reason for cannibalism was simply gastronomic. The natives loved the flesh that speaks, as human flesh was commonly called, and paid for it. The historian Ki Rag Chong observes that throughout Chinese history, learned cannibalism was often practiced for culinary appreciation. In his popular book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, Jared Diamond suggests that protein starvation is probably also the ultimate reason why cannibalism was widespread in traditional New Guinea highland societies. And both in New Zealand and Fiji, cannibals explained their acts as due to a lack of animal meat. In Liberia, a former cannibal argued that it would have been wasteful to let the flesh of killed enemies spoil, and eaters of human flesh in the Bismarck archipelago expressed the same sentiment. In many cases, human flesh was also described as particularly delicious, especially when it came from women, children, or both. Such statements are on record for various regions and peoples, including the Aztecs, today's Liberia and Nigeria, the Fang people in West Central Africa, the Congo Basin, China up to the 14th century, Sumatra, Borneo, Australia, New Guinea, New Zealand, and Fiji, as well as various other Melanesian and Polynesian islands. There is a debate among anthropologists on how important functionalist reasons are for the understanding of institutionalized cannibalism. Diamond is not alone in suggesting that the consumption of human flesh was of nutritional benefit for some populations in New Guinea, and the same case has been made for other tropical peoples, exploiting a diverse range of animal foods, including human flesh. The materialist anthropologist Marvin Harris argued that a shortage of animal protein was also the underlying reason for Aztec cannibalism. The cultural anthropologist Marshall Salins, on the other hand, rejected such explanations as overly simplistic, stressing that cannibal customs must be regarded as complex phenomena with myriad attributes, which can only be understood if one considers symbolism, ritual, and cosmology in addition to their practical function. While not a motive, the term innocent cannibalism has been suggested for cases of people eating human flesh without knowing what they are eating. It is a subject of myths, such as the myth of Sistahs, who unknowingly ate the flesh of his own sons. There are also actual cases on record, for example, from the Congo Basin, where cannibalism had been quite widespread, and where even in the 1950s, travelers were sometimes served a meat dish, learning only afterwards that the meat had been of human origin. In pre-modern medicine, an explanation given by the now discredited theory of humorism for cannibalism was that it was caused by a black acrimonious humor, which, being lodged in the linings of the ventricles of the heart, produced a voracity for human flesh. On the other hand, the French philosopher Michel de Montaigne understood war cannibalism as a way of expressing vengeance and hatred towards one's enemies and celebrating one's victory over them, thus giving an interpretation that is close to modern explanations. He also pointed out that some acts of Europeans in his own time could be considered as equally barbarous, making his essay of Cannibals in 1580 a precursor to later ideas of cultural relativism. Body parts and culinary practices. Nutritional value of the human body. Archaeologist James Cole investigated the nutritional value of the human body and found it to be similar to that of animals of similar size. He notes that according to ethnographic and archaeological records, nearly all edible parts of humans were sometimes eaten. Not only skeletal muscle tissue, flesh or meat in a narrow sense, but also lungs, liver, brain, heart, nervous tissue, bone marrow, genitalia, and skin, as well as kidneys. For a typical adult man, the combined nutritional value of all these edible parts is about 126,000 kilocalories or kcal. The nutritional value of women and younger individuals is lower because of their lower body weight. For example, around 86% of a male adult for an adult woman and 30% for a boy aged around 5 or 6. As the daily energy need of an adult man is about 2,400 kilocalories, a dead male body could thus have fed a group of 25 men for a bit more than 2 days, provided they ate nothing but the human flesh alone. Longer if it was part of a mixed diet. The nutritional value of the human body is thus not insubstantial, though Cole notes that for prehistoric hunters, large megafauna such as mammoths, rhinoceros, and bisons would have been an even better deal as long as they were available and could be caught because of their much higher body weight. Hearts and livers. Cases of people eating human livers and hearts, especially of enemies, have been reported from across the world. After the Battle of Uhud, 625, Hind bint Utbah ate, or at least attempted to, the liver of Hamza ibn Abd al-Muttalib, whatever, an uncle of Muhammad. At that time, the liver was considered the seat of life. French Catholics ate livers and hearts of Huguenots at the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572, in some cases also offering them for sale. In China, medical cannibalism was practiced over centuries. People voluntarily cut their own body parts, including parts of their livers, and boiled them to cure ailing relatives. Children were sometimes killed because eating their boiled hearts was considered a good way of extending one's life. Emperor Wuzong of Tang, Wu-Tang Clan, supposedly ordered provincial officials to send him the hearts and livers of 15-year-old boys and girls when he had become seriously ill, hoping in vain this medicine would cure him. Later, private individuals sometimes followed his example, paying soldiers who kidnapped preteen children for their kitchen. When human flesh and organs were sold openly at the marketplace during the Taiping Rebellion in 1850 to 1864, human hearts became a popular dish, according to some who afterwards freely admitted having consumed them. According to a missionary's report from the brutal suppression of the Dungan Revolt of 1895 through 1896 in northwestern China, thousands of men, women, and children were ruthlessly massacred by the imperial soldiers, and many a meal of human hearts and livers was partaken of by soldiers, supposedly out of a belief that this would give them the courage their enemies had displayed. In World War II, Japanese soldiers ate the livers of killed Americans in the Chichijima incident. Many Japanese soldiers who died during the occupation of Jolo Island in the Philippines had their livers eaten by the local Moro fighters, according to Japanese soldier Fujioka Akiyoshi. During the Cultural Revolution, 1966 through 1976, hundreds of incidents of cannibalism occurred, mostly motivated by hatred against supposed class enemies, but sometimes also by health concerns. In a case recorded by the local authorities, a school teacher in Mingshan County heard that consuming a beauty's heart could cure disease. He then chose a 13 or 14-year-old student of his and publicly denounced her as a member of the enemy faction, which was enough to get her killed by an angry mob. After the others had left, he cut open the girl's chest, dug out her heart, and took it home to enjoy. In a further case that took place in Wusan County, likewise in the Guangxi region, three brothers were beaten to death as supposed enemies. Afterwards, their livers were cut out, baked, and consumed as medicine. According to the Chinese author Zhang Yi, who researched these events, the consumption of human liver was mentioned at least 50 or 60 times in just a small number of archival documents. He talked with a man who had eaten human liver and told him that barbecued liver is delicious. During a massacre of the Madris minority in the Indonesian part of Borneo in 1999, reporter Richard Lord Perry met a young cannibal who had just participated in a human barbecue and told him without hesitation, "It tastes just like chicken, especially the liver, just the same as chicken." In 2013, during the Syrian civil war, Syrian rebel Abu Sakar was filmed eating parts of the lung or liver of a government soldier while declaring that "We will eat your hearts and your livers, you soldiers of Bashar the dog." Breasts, palms, and soles. Various accounts from around the world mention women's breasts as a favorite body part. Also frequently mentioned are the palms of the hands and sometimes the soles of the foot, regardless of the victim's gender. Jerome, in his treatise against Jovininus, claimed that the British Atticoti were cannibals who regarded the buttocks of men and the breasts of women as delicacies. During the Mongol invasion of Europe in the 13th century and their subsequent rule over China during the Yuan dynasty, 1271 through 1368, some Mongol fighters practiced cannibalism, and both European and Chinese observers record a preference for women's breasts, which were considered delicacies, and if there were many corpses, sometimes the only part of a female body that was eaten. Of men, only the thighs were said to be eaten in such circumstances. After meeting a group of cannibals in West Africa in the 14th century, the Moroccan explorer Ibn Battuta recorded that according to their preferences, the tastiest part of women's flesh is the palms and the breast. Centuries later, the anthropologist Percy Amory Talbot wrote that in southern Nigeria, the parts in greatest flavor are the palms of the hands, the fingers and toes, and of a woman, the breast. Regarding the north of the country, his colleague Charles Kingsley Meek added, among all the cannibal tribes, the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet were considered the tidbits of the body. That's given pig's feet. Among the Apambia, a cannibalistic clan of the Azande people in Central Africa, the palms of the hands and the soles of the foot were considered the best parts of the human body, while their favorite dish was prepared with fat from a woman's breast, according to the missionary and ethnographer F. Jarrow. Similar preferences are on record throughout Melanesia. According to the anthropologists Bernard Deacon and Camilla Wedgwood, women were specially fattened for eating. Everybody thick, right? Everybody want to be thick. In Vanuatu, the breast being the great delicacy. A missionary confirmed that a body of female usually formed the principal part of the repast at feast for chiefs and warriors. The ethnologist Felix Spicer writes, apart from the breasts of women and the genitals of men, palms of hands and soles of feet were the most coveted morsels. He knew a chief of Ambe, one of the islands of Vanuatu, who, according to fairly reliable sources, dined on a young girl's breast every few days. When visiting the Solomon Islands in the 1980s, anthropologist Michael Krieger met a former cannibal who told him that women's breasts had been considered the best part of the human body because they were so fatty, with fat being a rare and sought delicacy. They were also considered among the best parts in New Guinea and the Bismarck Archipelago. Modes of preparation. Based on theoretical considerations, the structuralist anthropologist Claude Levi-Strauss suggested that human flesh was most typically boiled, with roasting also used to prepare the bodies of enemies and other outsiders in exocannibalism, but rarely in funerary endocannibalism when eating deceased relatives. But an analysis of 60 sufficiently detailed and credible descriptions of institutionalized cannibalism by anthropologist Paul Shankman failed to confirm this hypothesis. Shankman found that roasting and boiling together accounted for only about half of the cases, with roasting being slightly more common. In contrast to Levi-Strauss's predictions, boiling was more often used in exocannibalism, while roasting was about equally common for both. Shankman observed that various other ways of preparing people were repeatedly employed as well. In 1/3 of all cases, 2 or more modes were used together. Some bodies or body parts were boiled or baked, while others were roasted. Human flesh was baked in steam, on preheated rocks, or in earth ovens, a technique widely used in the Pacific, smoked, which allowed to preserve it for later consumption, or eaten raw. While these modes were used in both exo and endo cannibalism, another method that was only used in the latter and only in the Americas was to burn the bones or bodies of deceased relatives and then to consume the bone ash. Wood. Ashland. Anyway. After analyzing numerous accounts from China, Qi Ray Chong similarly concludes that a variety of methods for cooking human flesh were used in this country. Most popular were broiling, roasting, boiling, and steaming, followed by pickling in salt, wine, sauce, and the like. Human flesh was also often cooked into soup or stewed in cauldrons. Eating human flesh raw was the least popular method, but a few cases are on record too. Chong notes that human flesh was typically cooked in the same way as ordinary foodstuffs for daily consumption. No principal distinction from the treatment of animal meat is detectable, and nearly any mode of preparation used for animals could also be used for people. Whole body roasting and baking. Though human corpses, like those of animals, were usually cut into pieces for further processing, reports of people being roasted or baked whole are on record throughout the world. At the archaeological site of Herxheim, Germany, more than 1,000 people were killed and eaten about 7,000 years ago, and the evidence indicates that many of them were spit roasted whole over open fires. During severe famines in China and Egypt during the 12th and early 13th centuries, there was a black market trade in corpses of little children that were roasted or boiled whole. In China, human flesh sellers advertised such corpses as good for being boiled or steamed whole, including their bones, and praised their particular tenderness. In Cairo, Egypt, the Arab physician Abd al-Latif al-Baghdadi repeatedly saw little children, roasted or boiled, offered for sale in baskets on street corners during a heavy famine that started in 1200 CE. Older children sometimes suffered the same fate. Once he saw a child nearing the age of puberty who had been found roasted. Two young people confessed to having killed and cooked the child. In some cases, children were roasted and offered for sale by their own parents. Other victims were street children who had become very numerous and were often kidnapped and cooked by people looking for food or extra income. Al-Latif states that the guilty were rarely caught in the act and only when they were careless. The victims were so numerous that sometimes 2 or 3 children, even more, would be found in a single cooking pot. Al-Latif notes that while initially people were shocked by such acts, they eventually grew accustomed and some conceived such a taste for these detestable meats that they made their ordinary provender, eating them for enjoyment and thinking up a variety of preparation methods. The horror people had felt at first vanished entirely. One spoke of it and heard it spoken of as a matter of everyday indifference. After the end of the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty, 1271 through 1368, a Chinese writer criticized in his recollections of the period that some Mongol soldiers ate human flesh because of its taste, rather than, as had also occurred in other times, merely in cases of necessity. He added that they enjoyed torturing their victims, often children or women, whose flesh was preferred over that of men, by roasting them alive in large jars whose outside touched the fire or on an iron grate. Other victims were placed inside a double bag, which was put into a large pot and so boiled alive. While not mentioning live roasting or boiling, European authors also complained about cannibalism and cruelty during the Mongol invasion of Europe, and a drawing in the Chronica Majora compiled by Matthew Paris shows Mongol fighters spit roasting a human victim. Pedro de Marguerite, who accompanied Christopher Columbus during his second voyage, afterwards stated that he saw there with his own eyes several Indians skewered on spits being roasted over burning coals as a treat for the gluttonous. Jean de Lery, who lived for several months among the Tupinamba in Brazil, writes that several of his companions reported that they had seen not only a number of men and women cut in pieces and grilled on the boucans, but also little unweaned children roasted whole after a successful attack on an enemy village. According to German ethnologist Leo Frobenius, children captured by Songhai slave raiders in the Central African Kasai region that were too young to be sold with a profit were instead skewered on long spears like rats and roasted over a quickly kindled large fire for consumption by the raiders. In the Solomon Islands in the 1870s, a British captain saw a dead body, dressed and cooked whole, offered for sale in a canoe. A settler treated the scene as an everyday occurrence and told him that he had seen as many as 20 bodies lying on the beach, dressed and cooked. Decades later, a missionary reported that whole bodies were still offered up and down the coast in canoes for sale after battles, since human flesh was eaten for pleasure. In Fiji, Whole human bodies cooked in earth ovens were served in carefully prearranged postures, according to anthropologist Laura Murfison and several other sources. The limbs, having been arranged in the posture which it is intended they shall assume, banana leaves are wrapped round them to prevent the flesh falling off in the possible event of over baking. A hole of sufficient size is then dug in the earth and filled with dry wood, which is set on fire. When it is well kindled, a number of stones, about the size of a man's fist, are thrown into it. And when the fired wood is burnt down to a mass of glowing embers, some of the heated stones are lifted nimbly by tongs made of bent withes and thrust within the dead man's body. Presently, the mound swells and rises. Little cracks appear, whence issue jets of steam, diffusing a savory odor. And in due time, of which the Fijians are excellent judges, the culinary process is complete. The earth is then cautiously removed, the body lifted out, its wrappings taken off, its face painted, a wig excuse me, a wig or a turban placed upon its head, and there we have a trussed frog, quote unquote, as such steamed corpses were called. In all its unspeakable hideousness, staring at us with wide open, prominent, lackluster eyes. There is no burning or roasting. The body is cooked in its own steam, and the features are so little disturbed by the process that the dead man can almost always be recognized by those who knew him when he was alive. Interesting. Within this archipelago, it was especially the Gaw Islanders who were famous for cooking bodies whole. In New Caledonia, a missionary named Taunga from the Cook Islands repeatedly saw how whole human bodies were cooked in earth ovens. They tied the hands together and bundled them up together with the intestines. The legs are bent up and bound with hibiscus bark. When it is completed, they lay the body out flat on its back in the earth oven. Then, when it is baked ready, they cut it up and eat it. Taunga commented, "One curious thing is that when a man is alive, he has a human appearance, but after he is baked, he looks more like a dog, as the lips are shriveled back and his teeth are bared." Given Fire Marshal Bill. Let me tell you something. Among the Maori in New Zealand, children captured in war campaigns were sometimes spit roasted whole. After slitting open their bellies to remove the intestines, as various sources report, enslaved children, including teenagers, could meet the same fate, and whole babies were sometimes served at the tables of chiefs. In the Marquesas Islands, captives, preferably women, killed for consumption, were spitted on long poles that entered between their legs and emerged from their mouths and then roasted whole. Similar customs had a long history in Nuku Hiva or Hiva, the largest of these islands. Archaeologists found the partially consumed remains of a young child that had been roasted whole in an oven during the 14th century or earlier. Medical aspects. A well-known case of mortuary cannibalism is that of the Fore tribe in New Guinea, which resulted in the spread of the prion disease Kuru. Although the Fore's mortuary cannibalism was well documented, the practice had ceased before the cause of the disease was recognized. However, some scholars argue that although post-mortem dismemberment was the practice during funeral rites, cannibalism was not. Marvin Harris theorizes that it happened during a famine period coincident with the arrival of Europeans and was rationalized as a religious rite. In 2003, a publication in Science received a large amount of press attention when it suggested that early humans may have practiced extensive cannibalism. According to this research, genetic markers commonly found in modern humans worldwide suggest that today many people carry a gene that evolved as protection against the brain diseases that can be spread by consuming human brain tissue. A 2006 reanalysis of the data questioned this hypothesis because it claimed to have found a data collection bias, which led to an erroneous conclusion. This claim bias came from incidents of cannibalism used in the analysis not being due to local cultures, but having been carried out by explorers, stranded seafarers, or escaped convicts. The original authors published a subsequent paper in 2008 defending their conclusions. Myths, legends, and folklore. Cannibalism features in the folklore and legends of many cultures and is most often attributed to evil characters or as extreme retribution for some wrongdoing. Examples include the witch in Hansel and Gretel, Lamia of Greek mythology, and the witch Baba Yaga of Slavic folklore. A number of stories in Greek mythology involve cannibalism, in particular the eating of close family members. Pay attention. The stories of Thyestes, Tereus, and especially Cronus, who became Saturn in the Roman pantheon. The story of Tantalus is another example, though here a family member is prepared for consumption by others. The Wendigo is a creature appearing in the legends of the Algonquian people. It is thought of variously as a malevolent, cannibalistic spirit that could possess humans or a monster that humans could physically transform into. Those who indulged in cannibalism were at particular risk, and the legend appears to have reinforced this practice as taboo. The Zuni people tell the story of the Atasaya, a giant who cannibalizes his fellow demons and seeks out human flesh. The Weishuj is a demonic cannibalistic creature that seeks out human flesh, appearing in the mythology of the Athabascan people. It is said to be half monster and half human-like. However, it has many shapes and forms. Skepticism. William Ahrens, author of The Man-Eating Myth, Anthropology and Anthropophagy, questions the credibility of reports of cannibalism and argues that the description by one group of people of another people as cannibals is a consistent and demonstrable ideological and rhetorical device to establish perceived cultural superiority. Ahrens bases his thesis on a detailed analysis of various classic cases of cannibalism reported by explorers, missionaries, and anthropologists. He claims that all of them were steeped in racism, unsubstantiated, or based on secondhand or hearsay evidence. Though widely discussed, Ahrens' book generally failed to convince the academic community. Claude Levi-Strauss observes that in spite of his brilliant but superficial book, no serious ethnologist disputes the reality of cannibalism. Shirley Lindenbaum notes that while after Ahrens' provocative suggestion, many anthropologists re-evaluated their data, the outcome was an improved and more nuanced understanding of where, why, and under which circumstances cannibalism took place rather than a confirmation of his claims. Anthropologists working in the Americas, Africa, and Melanesia now acknowledge that institutionalized cannibalism occurred in some places at some times. Archaeologists, archaeologists and evolutionary biologists are taking cannibalism seriously. Mhm. Lindenbaum and others point out that Ahrens displays a strong ethnocentrism. His refusal to admit that institutionalized cannibalism ever existed seems to be motivated by the implied idea that cannibalism is the worst thing of all, worse than any other behavior people engaged in, and therefore uniquely suited to vilifying others. Katja Ekholm Friedman calls this a remarkable opinion in a culture, the European/American one, that has been capable of the most extreme cruelty and destructive behavior, both at home and in other parts of the world. She observes that, contrary to European values and expectations, in many parts of the Congo region, there was no negative evaluation of cannibalism. On the contrary, people expressed their strong appreciation of this very special meat and could not understand the hysterical reactions from the white man's side. And why indeed, she goes on to ask, should they have had the same negative reactions to cannibalism as Ahrens and his contemporaries? Implicitly, he assumes that everybody throughout human history must have shared the strong taboo placed by his own culture on cannibalism, but he never attempts to explain why this should be so, and neither logic nor historical evidence justifies this viewpoint, as Christian Psychis commented. Some have argued that it is the taboo against cannibalism rather than its practice that needs to be explained. Hubert Murray, the lieutenant governor of Papua in the early 20th century, admitted that I have never been able to give a convincing answer to a native who says to me, "Why should I not eat human flesh?" After observing that Orokaiva people in New Guinea explain their cannibal customs as due to a simple desire for good food, the Australian anthropologist F.E. Williams commented, "Anthropologically speaking, the fact that we ourselves should persist in a superstitious or at least sentimental prejudice against human flesh is more puzzling than the fact that the Orokaiva, a born hunter, should see fit to enjoy perfectly good meat when he gets it." Accusations of cannibalism could be used to characterize indigenous peoples as uncivilized, primitive, or even inhuman. While this means that the reliability of reports of cannibal practices must be carefully evaluated, especially if their wording suggests such a text, many actual accounts do not fit this pattern. The earliest first-hand account of cannibal customs in the Caribbean comes from Diego Alvarez Chanca, who accompanied Christopher Columbus on his second voyage. His description of the customs of the Caribs of Guadeloupe includes their cannibalism. Men killed or captured in war were eaten, while captured boys were castrated and used as servants until they grew up, when they were slaughtered for consumption. But he nevertheless notes that these people are more civilized than the other islanders, who did not practice cannibalism. Nor was he an exception. Among the earliest reports of cannibalism in the Caribbean and the Americas, there are some, like those of Amerigo Vespucci, that seem to mostly consist of hearsay and gross exaggerations, but others by Chanca, Columbus himself, and other early travelers show genuine interest and respect for the natives and include numerous cases of sincere praise. Reports of cannibalism from other continents follow similar patterns. Condescending remarks can be found, but many Europeans who described cannibal customs in Central Africa wrote about those who practiced them in quite positive terms, calling them splendid and the finest people, and not rarely, like Chanca, actually considering them as far in advance of and intellectually and morally superior to the non-cannibals around them. Writing from Melanesia, the missionary George Brown explicitly rejects the European prejudice of picturing cannibals as particularly ferocious and repulsive, noting instead that many cannibals he met were no more ferocious than others and indeed very nice people. Reports or assertions of cannibal practices could nevertheless be used to promote the use of military force as a means of civilizing and pacifying the savages. During the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire and its earlier conquest in the Caribbean, there were widespread reports of cannibalism, and cannibals became exempted from Queen Isabella's prohibition on enslaving the indigenous. Another example of the sensationalism of cannibalism and its connection to imperialism occurred during Japan's 1874 expedition to Taiwan. As Robert Eskildsen describes, Japan's popular media exaggerated the Aborigines' violent nature, in some cases by wrongly accusing them of cannibalism. The horrid practice, the myth and reality of traditional Maori cannibalism, 2008, by New Zealand historian Paul Moon, received a hostile reception by some Maori who felt the book tarnished their whole people. However, the factual accuracy of the book was not seriously disputed, and even critics such as Margaret Mutu grant that cannibalism was definitely practiced and that it was part of our Maori culture. If anybody has seen the TV show The 100, there was a girl who had like a really, I don't know if it was, I guess it was deformed. She had a big deformed hand, and I think her name was Maori or something. Emery, something like that. Either way, something about deformations and eating people. History. There is evidence, both archaeological and genetic, that cannibalism has been practiced for at least hundreds of thousands of years by early Homo sapiens and archaic hominins. Among modern humans, cannibalism has been practiced by various groups. An incomplete list of cases where it is documented to have occurred in institutionalized form includes prehistoric and early modern Europe, South America, Mesoamerica, Iroquoian peoples in North America, parts of Western and Central Africa, China, and Sumatra, among pre-contact Aboriginal Australians, among Maori in New Zealand, on some other Polynesian islands, as well as in New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, and Fiji. Evidence of cannibalism has also been found in ruins associated with the ancestral Puebloans at Cowboy Wash in the southwestern United States. After World War I, institutionalized cannibalism has become very rare, but cases were still reported during times of famine. Occasional cannibal acts committed by individual criminals also are documented throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. The Americas. Cannibalism in the Americas has been practiced in many places throughout much of the history of North America and South America. The origin of the modern term cannibal comes from the island Caribs, who were encountered by Christopher Columbus in the Bahamas. Numerous cultures in North America were reported by European explorers and colonizers to have engaged in cannibalism. However, these claims are not always reliable since the Spanish used them as part of their justifications for conquest. At least some cultures have been physically and archaeologically proven beyond any doubt whatsoever to have undertaken institutionalized cannibalism. This includes human bones uncovered in a cave hamlet, confirming accounts of the Zizimes undertaking ritualized raids as part of their agricultural cycle after every harvest. Also proven are the Aztec ritual ceremonies during the Spanish conquest at Tecoaqui. The Anasazi in the 12th century have also been demonstrated to have undertaken cannibalism, possibly due to a drought, as shown by proteins from human flesh found in recovered feces. Disgusting. There is near universal agreement that some Mesoamericans practice human sacrifice and cannibalism, but there is no scholarly consensus as to its extent. Anthropologist Marvin Harris, author of Cannibals and Kings, he suggested that the flesh of the victims was a part of an aristocratic diet as a reward, since the Aztec diet was lacking in proteins. According to Harris, the Aztec economy would not support feeding slaves they captured in war, and the columns of prisoners were marching meat. Conversely, Bernard R. Ortiz de Montellano has proposed that Aztec cannibalism coincided with times of harvest and should be thought of as more of a Thanksgiving. Montellano rejects the theories of Harner and Harris, saying that with evidence of so many tributes and intensive Chinampa agriculture, the Aztecs did not need any other food sources. William Aarons's 1979 book, The Man-Eating Myth, claimed that there is no firm, substantial evidence for the socially accepted practice of cannibalism anywhere in the world at any time in history, but his views have been largely rejected as irreconcilable with actual evidence. In later times, cannibalism has occasionally been practiced as a last resort by people suffering from famine. Well-known examples include the ill-fated Donner Party, 1846 through 1847, and the crash of Nicaraguan Air Force Flight 571 in 1972, after which the survivors ate the bodies of the dead. Additionally, there are cases of people engaging in cannibalism for sexual pleasure, such as Albert Fish and Jeffrey Dahmer. Africa. Acts of cannibalism in Africa have been reported from various parts of the continent, ranging from prehistoric times until the 21st century. The possibly oldest evidence of human cannibalism has been found in Kenya, in Eastern Africa. There is little evidence of later cannibalism in East Africa, but the Ugandan dictator Idi Amin was reputed to practice it, and acts of voluntary and forced cannibalism have been reported from the South Sudanese Civil War. While the oldest known written mention of cannibalism is from the tomb of the Egyptian king Unas, later evidence from Egypt shows it to only reappear during occasional episodes of severe famine. The oldest records of cannibalism in West Africa are from Muslim authors who visited the region in the 14th century. Later accounts often ascribe it to secret societies, such as the Leopard Society, is given the beast. Cannibal practices were also documented among various Nigerian peoples, such as the Igbo. The victims were usually killed or captured enemies, kidnapped strangers, and purchased slaves. Cannibalism was practiced to express hatred and to humiliate one's enemies, as well as to avoid waste and because meat in general was rare. Human flesh was also considered as tastier than that of animals. While its consumption during peacetime seems to have ceased, cannibal acts are on record for civil wars in Liberia and Sierra Leone around the turn from the 20th to the 21st century. In the late 19th century, cannibalism seems to have been especially prevalent in parts of the Congo Basin. While some groups rejected the custom, others indulged in human flesh, often considering it superior to other meats. Killed or captured enemies could be consumed, and individuals from different ethnic groups were sometimes hunted down for the same purpose. Slaves were also sacrificed for the table, especially young children who were otherwise in little demand but praised as particularly delicious. In some areas, human flesh and slaves intended for eating were sold at marketplaces. While cannibalism became rarer under the colonial Congo Free State and its Belgium-run successor, colonial authorities seem to have done little to suppress the practice. Human flesh still appeared on the tables up to the 1950s and was both eaten and sold during the chaos of the Congo crisis in the 1960s. Occasional reports of cannibalism during violent conflicts continue into the 21st century. Cannibalism was also reported from north of the Congo Basin, extending up to the Central African Republic Civil War, which started in 2012. Jean Bedel Bokassa, dictator of the Central African Republic, seems to have eaten the flesh of opponents and prisoners in the 1970s. Europe. Acts of cannibalism in Europe seem to have been relatively prevalent in prehistory, but also occurred repeatedly in later times, often motivated by hunger, hatred, or medical concerns. Both anatomically modern humans and Neanderthals practiced cannibalism to some extent in the Pleistocene, and Neanderthals may have been eaten by modern humans as the latter spread into Europe. Amongst humans in prehistoric Europe, archaeologists have uncovered many clear and indisputable sites of cannibalism, as well as numerous other finds of which cannibalism is a plausible interpretation. In antiquity, several Greek and Roman authors mention cannibal customs in remote parts of the continent, such as beyond the Dnieper River, the Dnieper River, and in Britain. The Stoic philosopher Chrysippus noted that burial customs varied widely, with funerary cannibalism being practiced by many peoples, though rejected by the Greek. Several cases of survival cannibalism during sieges are on record. Cannibalism to face off starvation was also practiced in later times, such as during the Great Famine of 1315 through 1317. In the early modern and colonial era, shipwrecked sailors ate the bodies of the deceased or drew lots to decide who would have to die to provide food for the others, a widely accepted custom of the sea. That reminds me of the story of Jonah in the whale, where I believe they cast lots, or he just told them that it was him, something like that. But as you'll see, a lot of these stories will overlap. During the First Crusade, some crusaders ate the bodies of killed enemies, with the reasons for these acts, hunger or hatred, being a matter of debate. Various cases of undoubtedly revenge-driven cannibalism took place in early modern Italy. In 1672, the Dutch statesman Johann de Witt and his brother were lynched and partially eaten by an angry mob. In early modern Europe, the consumption of body parts and blood for medical purposes became popular. Reaching its height during the 17th century, this practice continued in some cases into the second half of the 19th century. The first half of the 20th century saw a resurgence of acts of survival cannibalism in Eastern Europe, especially during the Russian famine of 1921 through 1922, the Soviet famine of 1930-1933, and the siege of Leningrad. Several serial killers, among them Karl Dink and Andrei Chikatilo, consumed parts of their victims. A few other people, such as reporter William Seabrook and artist Rick Gibson, ate human flesh out of curiosity or to shock the public without killing anyone for the purpose. At the start of the 21st century, Armand Muse became infamous for killing and eating a voluntary victim whom he had found via the internet, and that is giving Purge vibes. Follow me now. Asia. Acts of cannibalism in Asia have been reported from various parts of the continent, ranging from ancient times to the 21st century. Human cannibalism is particularly well documented for China and for islands that today belong to Indonesia. The history of cannibalism in China is multifaceted, spanning from cases motivated by food scarcity during famines and wars to culturally accepted practices motivated by vengeance, medical beliefs, and even culinary pleasure. Records from China's official dynastic histories document over 300 episodes of cannibalism, many of them seen as an inevitable means of avoiding starvation. Cannibalism was also employed as a form of vengeance, with individuals and state officials consuming enemies' flesh to further humiliate and punish them. The official histories also document multiple instances of voluntary cannibalism, often involving young individuals offering some of their flesh to ill family members as a form of medical treatment. Various reports, especially from early history and the medieval era, indicate that human flesh could also be served at lavish feasts and was considered an exotic delicacy by some. Generally, the reports from Chinese history suggest that people had fewer reservations about eating human flesh than one might expect today. Episodes of cannibalism in China continued into the 20th century, especially during the Great Leap Forward 1958 through 1962 famine. During the Cultural Revolution 1966 through 1976, multiple cases motivated by hatred rather than hunger seem to have occurred. In Sumatra, cannibal practices are documented especially for the 14th and the 19th centuries, with purchased children, killed or captured enemies, and executed criminals mentioned as typical victims. In neighboring Borneo, some Dayaks ate human flesh, especially in the context of head-hunting expeditions and war campaigns. In both islands and also in China, human flesh was praised as extraordinarily delicious. Accounts from the 20th and early 21st centuries indicate that the cannibalization of despised enemies could still occur during episodes of mass violence, such as the Indonesian mass killings of 1965 through 66, and more recently, the Sampit conflict. Cases of famine cannibalism have been reported from North Korea during the mid-1990s and subsequent starvation periods, but their prevalence is debated. Various reports indicate that some Japanese soldiers ate human flesh during World War II, motivated by starvation or sometimes hatred. Oceania. Cannibalism in Oceania is well documented for many parts of this region, with reports ranging from the early modern period to, in a few cases, the 21st century. Some archaeological evidence has also been found. Human cannibalism in Melanesia and Polynesia was primarily associated with war, with victors eating the vanquished, while in Australia it was often a contingency for hardship to avoid starvation. Cannibalism used to be widespread in parts of Fiji, once nicknamed the Cannibal Isles, among some of the Maori people of New Zealand and in the Marquesas Islands. It was also practiced in New Guinea and in parts of the Solomon Islands, and human flesh was sold at markets in some Melanesian islands. Cannibalism was still practiced in Papua New Guinea as of 2012 for cultural reasons. Oh, right. Check my battery. Okay, I'm gonna end this and I'm gonna come back with Molech and Beale Street. So catch me on the next video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Love you guys.